Hello and welcome back to another Woodtones video here. Now with the neck cut out to the shape that I want, it's time to actually create and glue on the fingerboard. So the previous fingerboard for this instrument was a fretless design, so I'm going to be replicating that onto the new fingerboard. First things first is to take the piece of wood that is going to be the future fingerboard for this instrument, and to lay out the frets on it, or the fret lines. Previously, this instrument had a 34-inch scale length, but now because it has been shortened to 28 inches, the frets are going to be closer together on this one, so we cannot reuse the old fingerboard. There are handy calculators online that tell you the fret spacing. I use the StewMac fret calculator. It's free and easy to find. Whatever fret calculator or string template guide you're going to use, once you have the design nailed down, then you can go ahead and lay out the dimensions onto the wood. I would recommend marking out the fret spacing before you trim the fingerboard to the wedge shape that is going to be, just because working with a square board is nicer when you have a square line and you can draw all the frets completely parallel to each other. Be sure to follow the guide for the fret markings as closely as you can, as accuracy is of high value in this area. If a fret is 1 millimeter high or low of where it should be, the entire instrument is going to sound off. So now that the fretboard is all marked out for the fret spacings, it is time to actually trim down the fretboard to fit the neck that we have. So for this, I mark out the center on the fingerboard on the back side and draw a line through the center all the way down the board. And I also mark the center point on the neck itself, so that way I can line up the fingerboard directly in the middle of the neck. Then from there, it's simply holding down the neck to the fingerboard and tracing out the neck onto the fingerboard design. Again, make sure the neck does not move for this point. You want this to be as accurate as possible. Once the fingerboard is drawn out to fit the neck, there will be some hanging over the edge of the neck itself, some fretboard hanging out in space. For this part, don't guess the line. What I have found is if you take a long straight edge and line it up with the top and bottom of where the neckline is on the back of the fingerboard, you can continue the same line from the neck itself and create a smooth transition for the fretboard extension. Once the entire fretboard is marked out on the back where you want to cut it, it's a simple matter of cutting it on whatever your favorite instrument is. I'm going to be using a bandsaw for this, and be right back. Now that the fingerboard is trimmed to the desired width, it's a simple matter of replicating the pattern on the previous fingerboard onto the current one. Because this is a simple neck swap and not a whole new build, the goal is not to create some fancy new design, but to rather replicate the neck as accurately as possible so the instrument does not look changed. For this, I'm measuring where the white and black lines start and where they swoop down and end, and simply redrawing the pattern onto the new fingerboard. Then, once the pattern is drawn, I darken the line with a bit of ink and tape over it for the coming stain to help stop the white part from getting stained dark. Then once the line is completely masked off, I use a knife to trace along the line, making sure to cut a little into the wood fibers itself. The reason for this is because I'm going to be using a stain on the fingerboard, I don't want any of the stain to bleed into the white area. And the easiest way I have found to do that is to physically cut a couple of the fibers on the top layer of the wood to prevent the stain from bleeding down the fingerboard. So once the fingerboard is cut and masked off correctly, it's simply a matter of staining it black. You can use Sharpie on the very edge of the fingerboard to help maintain a clean, crisp line just so that there is absolutely no stain bleeding, but be wary of this. Oftentimes, blacks are not all equal. Some blacks are a different shade than others, and your Sharpie may not be the same color as the stain that you're putting on. So make sure to do a test sample first. Once the line is completely done, then it's just wiping the stain onto the fingerboard and making it all look black. I'm not going to be staining the underside of the fingerboard because I don't want anything to mess with the glue that's going to hold the fingerboard onto the neck. But everywhere else, on the sides and on the side facing the nut, make sure those are all stained the exact color. That way, if anybody has to work on this instrument in the future, the fingerboard won't look too bad if parts start to chip away or nut removals in the future result in white lines showing up. Then once the stain is fully applied, it's a simple matter of waiting for the stain itself to cure. You can read the bottle or the packaging to figure out how long the suggested drying time is, but one way I have found that helps me a lot more is if you can smell it, it's not cured.
Day 2.
Now that appropriate length of time has passed and the stain is fully cured, I now prepare the neck and the fretboard to be glued. For this, I like to make the back of the fretboard and the top of the neck slightly concave, so that way there is no humps, or when the wood glue soaks into the wood, it won't swell and create an uneven glue joint. Take your time for this step and be sure not to remove too much wood. It's very easy to go too deep. Be sure to check the fingerboard against the neck every so often to make sure that the wood is fitting well and that there are no gaps that can be seen on the edges. Now comes the time to finally glue the fretboard onto the neck. For this, I'm going to be using hide glue again, just because it is my current favorite glue. Now normally, if this neck has a truss rod, you would want to make sure that no glue got into the truss rod channel at all. That will hamper how the truss rod works, and it will also make removing and replacing the truss rod much harder later, should that need ever arise. But since this neck does not have a truss rod, a simple metal bar actually, I am not too worried about glue getting into that slot because it will simply hold the bar down better. So once the glue is thickly applied, quickly brush it across the surface, making sure that all of the surface is sufficiently covered, and then clamp the fingerboard down onto the now glued neck. You can use pins for this step. Some people recommend drilling tiny holes in a couple of the fret slots and tapping in small nails to help hold the fingerboard in place, but because this is going to be a fretless instrument, I cannot cover the holes with frets at all. So I'm going to be making sure that the fretboard does not slide at all. Make sure as you are clamping the neck that you are applying even pressure and that the clamps are not cockeyed or twisted at all. Should you be clamping the fretboard at a slight angle, it'll slide the fingerboard off of the neck and result in a failed glue that you're going to have to remove and redo later. That's not fun. Ask me how I know. And now we wait for the glue to cure this time.
Day 3.
Now that the fretboard has fully dried, it's time to add the veneer onto the peghead face. This helps to strengthen the peghead and also add some nice looks to it. Again, because this is a neck swap and not a completely new design, it's just a simple matter of replicating the thickness of the peghead veneer and the peghead itself and just simply redoing that onto the new neck. Once I've cut out a piece of veneer thin enough to fit onto the peghead, it's simply gluing it on, clamping it, and once again waiting. Once again, while you're clamping, make sure that none of the clamps force the veneer off to the side and result in you having to start the glue over again. Once the veneer has cured, it's simply taking it to your favorite saw of choice and cutting off the excess from the peghead veneer. Once the excess is cut away, simply sand any burn marks, scratches, or scuffs off of the peghead veneer and make it look as nice and smooth as possible. Then once the veneer is completely smooth, it's a matter of once again replicating the design from the previous neck onto the new neck. Again, draw the line, mask it off, cut the line, then stain and wait for the stain to dry yet again.
Day 4.
Now that the veneer is sanded, stained, and smoothed and ready to go, it's now on to heel carving. For this, I'm going to be moving off of the bench and putting the neck into my lap. What I found works best is taking a nice big sharp chisel and going slowly at it, and just working the heel down until it looks good to you. I like to draw a design on the back of the heel that I want to try and get down to, just so that way I have a symmetrical line to try and maintain evenness across both sides of the heel. Just take your time with this and enjoy the process. All you're doing is removing wood until the heel that you see in your mind is actually in front of you on the instrument neck. I think that's going to wrap up this episode of Woodtones. Next time we're going to be going into finishing the neck and drilling the bolt holes and finally bolting on the neck, closing up the back, and stringing her up for the first time in over a year. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video when it comes out. I know I have an incredibly regular upload schedule. Like the video if you did like it, it would mean a lot to me. And thanks so much for watching. I shall see you all in the next video. Take care.